Hello and welcome to The Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 1998 series 300. 300 was written and illustrated by Frank Miller, with beautifully painted colors done by his then wife Lynn Varley. The two worked on a number of comics together, including the also hugely successful comics Ronin and Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. The weakest part of this series is probably Miller's art. I'll probably say this a lot whenever I cover any of Miller's comics, but I'm just really not impressed by him as an artist. Sometimes he hits a nice level of stylistic that can look very cool, but a lot of the time it just looks sloppy to me. Or like he maybe messed up and just kinda ran with it. Like these shots. What's happening in them? I don't know. They're too messy for me to really say. The rest of the comic is pretty great though. Like I said, Varley's colors are beautiful and really save the visuals here, and Miller's writing is pretty top-notch. The entire series is about a single, real historical battle from ancient Greek history, where an army of Greeks led by 300 Spartan warriors faced off against the massively superior numbers of the Persian armies led by their king, Xerxes. The Spartans met the Persians at Thermopylae, which basically translates to the Hot Gates, and held them off for 3 days before, spoiler alert, finally being defeated. Let me preface this by saying I was actually a history major in college, with a focus on the ancient Near East, so it's safe to say I know a few things about ancient Greece, and certainly enough to know that historically accurate is not a term anyone would use to describe this series. So I'm going to apologize in advance that yes, I'm going to bore you with some actual history, because I feel like it's pretty important when talking about this comic. I won't judge this comic for being inaccurate though, just keep in mind that if what you're here for is accuracy, you won't be getting it. If instead what you're into is a bunch of mostly naked men throwing down like a bunch of stone cold badasses, then yeah, you'll find plenty of that. Let's see just how much and take this away. The comic opens with the titular 300 Spartans already marching to war, and already we have a big historical inaccuracy. Most likely Frank Miller based the Spartan dress not on history, but on the famous painting Leonidas at Thermopylae, painted during the Napoleonic years. Miller probably wanted to emphasize how tough the Spartans were, and also visually differentiate them from other Greeks. To that end, there is even a point where they make fun of Athenians for their war skirts and sculpted breastplates, which is funny I guess, but in reality the Spartans had them too. Even the most laymen are probably aware that this story would have taken place during the Bronze Age, and the Greeks were uniquely placed in the world to have access to the metals needed to smelt bronze. So the Greek soldiers, even the Spartans, would have been dressed head to toe in bronze armor, with bronze shields and bronze weapons. The Persians, for all their power, did not have much bronze, so even the most elite warriors, the Immortals, were typically not armored with anything stronger than wicker, which, you know, doesn't defend much against bronze. Even their weapons would have been made from weaker materials like copper or even stone, which wouldn't have been able to do a whole lot to bronze shield and armor. Guess reality just looked less cool though. Also immediate to note is the layout. With maybe a couple exceptions, this comic is drawn pretty much entirely long ways instead of tall, like a standard comic. I really have to admire Miller's dedication to doing something different. The collected edition is even bound long ways so that it flows in the correct direction. Pretty nice. When they stop for the night, a Spartan named Delios tells us what's the dealio with King Leonidas. When he was 7, he went into the wilderness to begin his Spartan training. They did do this, but they were supposed to pick a random Spartan slave soldier and then kill them, not a wolf like Leo does here. This comic goes to a lot of effort to depict the Greeks as free men fighting against the oppressive slave drivers of Persia, so Miller probably didn't want any mention of the Greeks also using slaves. The soldiers go to sleep in a big gay pile that kinda emphasizes to me why they wouldn't have been wearing these outfits. Pretty impractical. We then get more info on Leonidas as we see him kick a Persian messenger down a giant hole. This is legit history as far as we know, though it's usually attributed to Leonidas' father, but I'm still glad they included it because it's a good scene. The Persians did most of their conquering not through wars, but simply the threat of war. They actually sent these messengers around demanding this symbolic gesture of obedience. And if the people complied, it was seen as accepting Persian rule. If they didn't accept, often all the army had to do was show up and the people would fold. Greece wasn't having any of that though, especially Sparta, after hearing the Athenians refuse. The boy-loving Athenians, Leo calls them, though I'm not sure he has room to talk, cause again, big gay pile. With a fight looming, Leonidas goes to the Oracle for their blessing, because without it, he can't start a war. They don't give it because they wish to respect a religious celebration that the Spartans aren't supposed to fight during. This is also why they weren't at the Battle of Marathon before this, which was mostly Athenians, where they fought against overwhelming odds against Persian armies, without all the advantages the Spartans had at the Hot Gates, and won. So, less cool story, I guess? Let's just keep making fun of them for being inferior somehow. Also, we see that apparently the Persians had a hand in every plot, and have paid off the oracles to get them to refuse Leonidas' plan. So without the oracle's blessing, Leonidas decides to just go on a walk. You know, the after-dinner kind. Straight to Thermopylae, with his 300 bestest buds. His niece/wife even shows up to see him off. Yeah, same person. Them Spartans was gross, yo. She says, come back with your shield, or on it, which is a traditional farewell from Spartan wives, so nice touch including it here. That brings us back to the march, where we see them being joined by Arcadians, another Greek city-state. The Arcadians are upset that the Spartans brought so few soldiers when they themselves brought over 1,000. Leonidas replies that all Spartans are soldiers, whereas Arcadians are butchers and bakers and candlestick makers going to war. It's a good thing that none of the men he called out answered slave, cause that would have been pretty embarrassing given all their talk about being free men. That's probably what most of them were though. Slaves. More Greeks joined the fray until their numbers equal 7,000. I'm glad Miller actually allowed for this, even if he shows literally all other soldiers as being completely useless. This number comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who was given to hyperbole. Modern historians believe that the total numbers were actually quite a bit higher, but always sticking to around 300 Spartans. They were also followed along the way by this figure, Ephialtes. Ephialtes is a real figure from the accounts we have of the battle, though he probably wasn't horribly deformed like this. The story here is probably largely to introduce the concept of Spartans abandoning babies they didn't deem to be perfect, and used Ephialtes to illustrate what those imperfections can turn into. Though, come on, no imperfection causes this. Whatever this is supposed to be. I think Miller just really hated having to draw so many characters that actually look human, and wanted to draw something absurd and misshapen. Despite his deformity meaning he should have been killed at birth, Ephialtes was trained by his father to fight like a Spartan, and wants nothing more than to prove himself to Leonidas now. For his part, the king is surprisingly nice to Ephialtes, but still denies him the chance to fight because he wouldn't be able to use his shield to defend the man next to him. While the Spartan shield phalanx was undoubtedly important, the real reason for Spartan combat efficiency was a special tactic that they had perfected of pretending to retreat. Then, when their opponents broke rank in the excitement of victory, they would turn back around and slaughter them. Somehow the pretend to run away tactic didn't make it into the comic or the movie. I can't imagine why. But no army would be successful from a single tactic, or even just those two tactics. So Ephialtes probably could have been useful somewhere. His response to being rejected is to just throw himself off a cliff. Which, honestly, seems more like something from a comedy than a super serious piece like this. I actually laughed a little when I first read this comic because it just seems so absurd at the time. The Spartans go about preparing for war, and as they do, an emissary from the Persians approaches them. He taunts them, saying the Persians have so many archers that their arrows will blot out the sun, to which a Spartan coolly replies, "Then we will fight in the shade." Of all the snarky lines in this series, that one is my favorite, especially because this exchange is actually supposed to have taken place. I don't think there's any way we can know for sure, but I like to think that it did. That leads us, finally, to battle, which comprises most of the final two issues. Most of this focuses on the narrow corridor leading to the even narrower pass of the Hot Gates. The Spartans used the terrain to their advantage, as they definitely would have, and there's a lot of funneling the Persians' larger numbers into smaller ones and pushing them off of the nearby cliff. The Persians tried to demoralize the Spartans by sending in their immortals at night. Not sure where Miller got this image for the Persian immortal, but it's definitely not what they would have looked like. Kinda wish it was though, because they look pretty cool. The immortals are kind of embarrassingly defeated by having the Spartans push this giant mound of corpses down on them and then rush over to finish them off. Pretty messed up tactic, but pretty effective. Can't say if it was true or not, kinda like to think it was. In another attempt to demoralize the Spartans, the Persians also try sending elephants at them. This probably didn't happen, and I feel really bad for the poor things. Geez, Miller, doesn't the road already kill enough elephants? The Spartans' downfall doesn't come from superior numbers or any failure to fight, but rather by the traitor, Ephialtes, having somehow survived his drop off the cliff, giving Xerxes the location of an old goat path that allows the Persians to move their army around the Spartans, closing them in from both sides. Once the Greeks realize this is what is happening, they all abandon ship and head for home. The Spartans, though, live by that mantra of coming home with their shield or on it, so they stay to face their doom. Leonidas gets one last shot in at Xerxes before the Spartans are brutally cut down. Then we see that this whole story was, itself, a story being told by Delios, in prelude to the Battle of Plataea, where the Greek League would bring an end to the Greco-Persian Wars in a sound victory. And so enough with this madness, let's get to the breakdown. If you remove the judgment of historical accuracy, you're left with a pretty good comic. It definitely tells the story it sets out to tell, and it tells it pretty well, with some sense of style and entertainment. Frank Miller's art really bugs me at times, and I do have issues with how evil the dark-skinned Persians are portrayed to be, but at least these Greeks are less light-skinned than the ones in the movie. And though they are the heroes of the story, they're pretty big bastards themselves. And as much as I do hate on Miller's art, I do feel that this comic is definitely some of his strongest work. So all this considered, I'm going to go ahead and give this series a recommendation level of high. I honestly expected to hate this comic after how I felt about the movie, but it's really a very well made comic. Considering how short it is and how big a part of comics history it has become, I can't think of any reason why any comic fan wouldn't read it. Thanks everybody for watching. This is the first comic overview I've done about a comic that's already a movie, so that was kind of fun. Let me know in the comments what you think of how the two compare. That's all for now, and I hope to see you next time right here in the Comic Cave.